When Riot first started revealing cards for the Empires of the Ascended expansion, they began with Renekton, and that made me very happy because Renekton is a champion I enjoy. He's my thick, scaly boy, but that also just kind of let everybody know, it put us on notice that at some point we were going to see Nasus, because if you're not familiar with these two in League of Legends, in their lore and their history, they have a very storied rivalry. They have a legendary rivalry, so to see one without the other would have felt very out of place. And if I'm being honest, when I hear the word Shurima, I think of immediately three champions. I think of Renekton, I think of Nasus, and I think of Azir. So I expect to see all of them throughout the course of this expansion, but today we got Nasus. We got the good boy, the big dog, and he is a big dog of a champion, pun very well intended here. So we're going to cover him and all of the cards revealed today, but starting with Nasus, this is a 6-cost champion from Shurima, has the Ascended tag just like Renekton did, has the fearsome keyword, but only a 2/2 body, and that seems pretty small for a 6-cost champion. But if you are worried, have no fear, because his text reads, I have +1/+1 for each unit you've slain this game. Now, slay is a new keyword that they have also debuted with this reveal. If you're coming from the Elder Scrolls Legends, it's similar, but not 100% the same. There's a lot of nuance here. So I'm going to read word for word what they revealed today, and then I'm going to cover a bit about why I think this wording is important. So the wording that they released is, you get credit for slaying an ally or enemy if one of your cards kills it via damage, strike, or direct kill effect. So that is slay. And before we cover the rest of Nasus, I want to jump into slay here real quick because there are some important takeaways. First, right out of the gate, this is not just killing enemy units. You get credit for a slay if you kill an ally as well. So Shadow Isles, Demacia with single combat, and things like Dawn Speakers, for example, there's a lot of potential interactions with slay as a mechanic. Also, it kills it via damage, strike, or direct kill effect from your cards. Not your units, your cards. So if you Mystic Shot something and it dies, that counts as a slay for you. But it does not say obliterate, so any of your obliterate effects do not work, and that includes the self-obliterate effects like Hourglass that was recently revealed. So that does not count as a slay. Finally, from my understanding from reading this, I do not expect ephemeral deaths to count as a slay, because that is the keyword on the card killing it. That is not you killing it with a card. So I do not expect ephemeral to count, but all of the other things do count. So Chronicler of Ruin, for example, on your Undying unit, that is you slaying a unit. So when we go back and we look at Nasus now, this is, again, it's a 6-cost 2/2 with fearsome, but it gets +1/+1 for each unit you've slain this game. It could very easily be, you know, on curve at that point, a 6-cost 6/6 or better, assuming that you haven't buffed it in other ways, and we'll get to that in a moment. So this is a pretty reasonable champ, and it's going to become more and more impressive the longer the game goes. Now, it goes from level 1 to level 2 when it strikes for 10+ damage. So think like Vi, right? It's going to level up like Vi. Level 2 of Nasus gets the standard +1/+1, so it becomes a 3/3 base for the 6 cost. Still has the fearsome keyword, picks up the spell shield keyword, and that's very important. Also picks up the text, enemies have -1/-0. Now this is just a blanket effect. They just always have it. So that's going to open up some favorable trades. It's also going to make your fearsome units that much more effective. And I like this, even without considering the level 3. Now, this is an Ascended champion. There is a level 3, and that occurs when you've restored the Sun Disc. But even before we go on to talk about the level 3 version, I think this is a good enough champion to consider in some existing archetypes. Shadow Isles, I think, is a natural companion for Nasus because there are so many ways to destroy your own units, and there are fearsome units there, and they're going to benefit from him. And I think that you can go in multiple archetypes with Nasus. I legitimately think Nasus has the potential to fit into fearsome decks. I think he has the potential to fit in undying decks, which is a deck that in the past has not often run champions because they just don't really help the archetype. But Nasus is going to directly benefit from you self-destroying all your undying units. I also think that there's a strong chance Nasus fits into some sort of Shurima Shadow Isles late game control deck. Something that would, for example, try to win with like Ledros Atrocity traditionally, would also really benefit from a Nasus Atrocity attempt, because he's going to have a massive body, could end up getting, you know, into the teens as far as his size, even without the level 3. Again, we're talking like long form game. You could rack up a lot of slays. And then the big thing for me is that his level 2 picks up that keyword, that spell shield. So if you're trying to throw a unit at somebody's nexus via Atrocity, naturally protecting it with spell shield is a pretty big deal. Now, the level 3 version of Nasus is just utterly insane, just like the Renekton level 3 was. He becomes a 6 cost 10/10 with fearsome spell shield, still gets the +1/+1 for each unit you've slain. So I mean, at this point he's probably in the 20s if you've pulled this off, and now has the text enemies have -3/-0, so your fearsome units are likely getting in there. Anything that's big enough to still block Nasus, counting the -3/-0, is usually a big late game bomb itself. So really Nasus is just setting up a duel, like a kaiju battle, and he's still probably going to win, because at this point he's no longer like the dog, he is the god dog. This is a big boy if you get him to level 3. But I like the champ. I think, like I said, he has a lot of opportunity just with a Shadow Isles pairing. But as I said before, I think you could potentially pair him with something like Demacia, take advantage of single combats and challenger units. I think that if you wanted to be cheeky, maybe you do something with Piltover and Zaun, and you're running like Nasus and Vi, and maybe it's also Karina control, and you're just pinging a bunch of units, and then your champs are like mid-game bombs and Karina's your top end. Who knows? I think that he's versatile, despite him having some very clear synergy with certain archetypes and regions. I think that he's also relatively versatile because he just benefits from any deck that focuses on killing units. Now, his champion spell is Siphoning Strike, and so again, this is a spell that you can just run as a main deck option, but this is also his champion spell, and this is a spell that I really enjoy both competitively and for memes. Now, Siphoning Strike is a 5 cost slow spell, but it says an ally strikes a unit. If it dies, grant allied champions everywhere +2/+2. So again, as I kind of talk about the idea of maybe you pair Nasus with Demacia, even if you don't put Nasus in that deck, I think that a Shurima Demacia deck has some potential because of the likes of like Fiora, for example. Fiora loves getting bigger and she loves striking units, and so she would love to run a card like Siphoning Strike. And I think that Siphoning Strike is reasonably costed because it's a one-way strike. You know, being slow kind of hurts it a little bit, but being able to grant allied champions everywhere +2/+2 is also a pretty big deal, because if you consider some of your champions that are great in the early game but kind of fall off in the mid to late game, especially as a late draw, something like Siphoning Strike can help them out immensely. So I think about your Teemos, your Fizzes. Zoe is the one that I think really stands out, because at least Teemo, if you're running Teemo, you're also just on a general puff cap train, and whether or not he's big, he's still a threat, because at that point he's a leveled Teemo who's trying to double puff caps. Fizz always has that opportunity to like dodge spells with his effect, but Zoe is somebody who, you know, outside of hitting the enemy nexus and giving you the ability to invoke, she really loses steam the later in the game you draw her. So something like Siphoning Strike, where if you have successfully landed one, suddenly she's a 1-cost 3/3 elusive, even without the rest of her effects. She is now a worthwhile draw. And if you have landed like 2 Siphoning Strikes, well, that's a very cost-effective champion suddenly for a 1-cost 5/5 elusive. So I really like Siphoning Strike. I think that it's something I want to experiment with. I also love that it benefits all champions, but then it has the added benefit of extra Nasus benefit. What I mean by that is that with this, you're technically giving Nasus +3/+3 because he's getting the +2/+2 for being a champion, and then the +1/+1 on his own inherent text. So I love that he gets an extra bonus for his themed spell, but it is effective everywhere else. It's I think better than, say, Darius's version, where the stun being a 2-cost slow is kind of terrible, but it's amazing with Darius on the board. I think this is more in line with what I would like to see with these kind of themed spells that benefit a certain champion more than others. So I like this design. Now, as far as memes go, because I mentioned that I think this might find a home in some competitive decks, I just keep like giggling to myself thinking about a Howling Abyss deck running a bunch of Siphoning Strikes. Nothing makes me smile more than like the thought of Freljord, Shurima, hard control. You land like 2 Siphoning Strikes throughout the game, and then suddenly your Howling Abyss is letting you draw not just level 2 champions every round, but ones with +4/+4, because why not? And then further, like I'll take it a step further. If you're also playing Nasus in that deck like as your main champion, because you're trying to slay things anyway, you could run 3 natural Siphoning Strikes, and then you have the possibility of, you play Nasus and then your other copies become more Siphoning Strikes. So like in my head, I'm just imagining, +8, +8, +10, +10 champions. Is that going to happen very often? No. Is it going to happen competitively? No. But it sounds really fun and satisfying. So I'm sure try that at some point. Now, other cards were revealed with Nasus, both that are on the screen, and then I've got another graphic that I plan on putting up, but we're going to cover the ones on screen right now, starting with Rite of Calling. So this is a 0-cost slow spell that says kill an ally or destroy a mana gem to draw a champion. Pretty straightforward, but I like this card. I love the design of it because it helps with a couple of different archetypes. We've seen other cards destroy a mana gem, and we've seen some payoff cards for that, but this is another tool that helps with that archetype. This is also a tool that helps with the slay archetype, because again, killing an ally counts as a slay. This helps existing Shadow Isles decks. Like this is Entreat for Shadow Isles. I know this is a Shurima card, but all I keep thinking about is this is Entreat for Shadow Isles with almost no drawback, because being able to kill your 2-drop, turn it into a 4/3, and then also draw your Callista or something feels kind of bonkers to me. So I really like Rite of Calling, and I like that it costs 0, if I'm being honest, because you can sometimes for 0 mana force your opponent to spend mana and resources to stop the effect. And anytime you can spend little to no mana to bait out more mana from your opponent, there is certainly some level of control there. And I don't mean control as in like controlling the board, but I mean as controlling the actions of your opponent. Anytime you can put your opponent into a tough position where you make them act first when they don't want to, you make them have to decide if stopping this is, better than the alternative. Glimpse used to be a staple for all Shadow Isles decks, Glimpse the Unthinkable, and that was a card that would very often do that, where you would just sometimes lead off with a Glimpse on a unit, and now your opponent is saying, okay, I could kill that unit to prevent them from drawing cards, but then maybe I've used my removal on that instead of whatever it is they want to play as a follow-up, right? Rite of Calling is similar, where you can try to destroy an ally and they could spend removal to prevent that and prevent you drawing a champion, but in doing so, they've now spent that removal that maybe they could have used on the champion or used on something else. And so just overall, I love the card. I love the design. And it's another one that I kind of want to experiment with. Now, The last card on this graphic was Spirit Fire. This is a 7-cost burst spell, and it says give enemies -2/-0 and round end deal 2 to me this round. So I like that it's a burst spell because the -2/-0 is a very relevant combat trick. The fact that it's all enemies, yes, it's an expensive card at 7, but the fact that it's all enemies I think is very relevant. I think that this is potentially on par with something like Harsh Winds. It doesn't have the top end payoff quite the same, because sometimes just using Harsh Winds on 2 huge units is far more beneficial. But against aggro, this card is really good because you can play it at burst speed and you get the immediate benefit of the -2/-0, and then also the round end deal 2 to me means that this is kind of like a fog and an avalanche that's one-sided all on one card. I just see a lot of potential for this card as an anti-aggro tool, so I think this will end up being a very meta-dependent card. If aggro is popular and there are, you know, a bunch of decks trying to exploit the uncertain meta with a new expansion that usually occurs, this card could be a great inclusion. Now, if things start, you know, sort of settling down, decks are refined, aggro is not as popular necessarily, or, you know, the meta slows down, then this card might not be as good. Like, I think about a meta right now that is far more about, I think, like value generation, and I think a card like this isn't as good. But there are still benefits to a card like this, because this card, for example, is really good against, say, like Fizz and Twisted Fate, as long as they haven't played Mind Meld, because this buys you time against all those Burblefish and then potentially just nukes said Burblefish. So I'm pretty bullish on this card. I'm excited, and while I fully recognize that it's going to be a meta call at times, I think that the upside of this card is really, really strong, and I like it. So we're going to move on to the other cards that were revealed today and change this graphic here. And we're going to start with Sanctum Conservator. This is an 8-cost follower with the fearsome tag. Again, more of that fearsome love. And it says on play, if you've slain 13 or more units this game, kill all enemy followers, then summon a copy of me. So let that sink in. For 8, you get an 8/5 fearsome, and if you've been playing a dedicated control deck, you also blow up all followers and you copy this. This is definitely a bomb. This is like a game-ending bomb at times. I think that this is like Shurima's version of Karina, for example. It is going to require a commitment to doing it, because the slay 13 units is probably a bit difficult. It's not the sort of thing that you're likely going to have done by turn 8, right? So this is one of those 8 drops that's really not likely an 8 drop. But in the right deck, this thing could just close out a game. So high upside. I suspect it's probably hard to pull off consistently. Maybe in self-sacrifice decks, perhaps. But when it works, this thing is going to be really gratifying. All right, so we also have Rampaging Bakai. This is a 5-cost 4/6 follower. Has the Overwhelm keyword, and on play, if you've slain 4 or more units this game, an enemy and I strike each other. So 4 or more units, far easier to pull off, going to be a lot more consistent. Maybe not super easy to do on curve. So again, this is a 5 drop, so that's saying that you've had to have killed at least 1 unit every round but round 1. And if you want to play this like on 5, maybe even round 1 as well, but you know, maybe you bank your spell mana and then you've played other things. My point is again, this one, based on the numbers, probably not an on curve play, but it's got a built-in single combat on itself, has a good health. So I like that this is a 4/6 as opposed to, say, like a 6/4. I think that the increased health helps it a ton because of the single combat effect. This is more then likely going to be something that like comes into play. Maybe it nukes a 3/3. You're left with like a net 4/3 overwhelm and you killed a unit. That's good. Like that is a very cost effective card. Anytime historically, if you have units that also act as removal and either the condition isn't that difficult or the cost isn't too prohibitive, they've been pretty powerful historically. So like Rasa, when it cost 7 and the game first launched, for example, it was dominating the game and was an auto include in most Shadow Isles decks. Like even aggro decks were running it because it was very cost effective. So I think that, again, depending on the deck, but in more control style decks, this is a card that could definitely end up seeing play, because once you've hit the slain 4 units, this becomes, you know, you pay 5, you kill a unit, you get a body. That's good value. Next up, we have Bakai Reaper. This is a 1-drop, 1/2 with Fearsome, and when you slay a unit, grant me +1/+0. So this is interesting because there's been a number of 1-drops in the history of the game that, you know, start with kind of small stats and then they grow based on you doing something. Now, it might be I get +2/+0 when a barrier is applied. I get +2/+0 when something's healed. There's a, you know, not a 1-drop, but there's a 2-drop. I get the +2/+0 when something's stunned. This one is only +1/+0, but I understand why they went that route, because slaying a unit is, I think, far easier to pull off. You don't really have to commit one way or the other in terms of deck building, because there's plenty of ways to slay things. The fact that this has Fearsome, I think, is making this potentially playable as well. I think that if an archetype exists that is Fearsome based, that is a combination of Shurima and Shadow Isles, you know, we're talking like Nasus, maybe this card. I don't know if you go the Mist Wraith route or not. Maybe you do with some predict cards to ensure you're triggering Wraith Callers, because again, predict means that you don't necessarily have to go hard in terms of deck building to hit that allegiance. I think this could find a home, but I think that right now it's about 50-50, but I would not be shocked if this ended up in decks. All right, next up we have Ruinous Path. This is a 2-cost slow spell that says draw 1. If you've slain a unit this round, drain 2 from the enemy nexus. I love this as a control card. Paying 2 to draw 1, so you're just cycling it, but you also drain 2 from the nexus, so it acts as healing and some chip damage. Feels pretty good. And in any sort of deck that is control based, you likely have ways to slay a unit. The fact this is a low cost investment and it's under spell mana cap, I think this also could potentially find a home. Like, it's just powerful enough where you consider it anyway. Now, the last card that was revealed was Weight of Judgment. This is a 4-cost slow spell, and it deals 2 to a champion or 7 to a follower. So it kind of tickles a champion, which at 4 mana and slow speed is not the greatest, but it is still 4 cost and 2 to a champion, so it's like a 1-to-1 match for Twisted Fate. I think they hit the sweet spot here in terms of cost investment. So, you know, it's not going to feel great, but for decks that sometimes just don't have a way to kill Twisted Fate, this maybe helps you get there. So it's, you know, it's 4 to deal 2 to a champion, not necessarily the greatest, but spending 4 to do 7 to a follower is probably worth the trade-off, even at slow speed. So I don't know. I think that the slow speed might still end up hurting this, but I could see this as a 1 or a 2 of in some decks, depending on what the rest of the card pool looks like. And yeah, that's it. So if you made it this far, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. And I'm just going to cut this. I always get ranty at the end of videos, so you know what? I'm just going to cut this off. Thanks for watching. I'm going to read the comments, and I'll catch you in the next reveal video.